And we'll be recording this session so that those who can't make it today will be able to go back and refer to the session itself. So that will be really great. So I hope everyone is well today, and we've already done so much for Global Action Week for Education. We've been highlighting the work that our supporters have been doing, and we have been on Twitter sharing the message of global education and speaking with some of our partners like Global Partnership for Education. We had a wonderful opportunity to just spread the message of youth advocacy far and wide. So it's been great. It's been really great. And just excited to have you all here. So we'll get started in a few minutes. We know it's still only 2 after 12, and people are probably still accessing the webinar and jumping in. So we'll give it a couple of minutes, then we'll start going through our session. Hello, Joel. Would you like to introduce yourself? We have Gabriella. Gabriella is one of our youth advocates. She's very active. She's an excellent advocate for global education.
Hi, Gabriella. Thanks, Arielle. Looking forward to engaging with you all today and giving you a sense of my experience in advocacy and work on the Hill. So my name is Joel Colony. I am the Director of Global Policy and Advocacy for World Learning, which is a global nonprofit working to empower people and strengthen institutions through global education, sustainable development, and exchanges. So World Learning has been a member of the Global Campaign for Education for 6 years now, and we greatly appreciate that membership and partnership with GCE. Give you a little bit more, sorry Arielle, yeah, just a little bit more about what I do on the day-to-day. As Policy and Advocacy Director for World Learning, I am focused on developing strategies and priorities with respect to the U.S. government, other governments, and intergovernmental organizations, and building support for the international affairs budget, and specifically basic education funding, and guiding our participation in coalitions like GCE, as well as training our staff on external engagement and advocacy. So that's a bit about me.
Excellent. Yes, World Learning is a great coalition partner, and just the benefits of having such active members is that we have so much work that we can do together, and when we come together as a coalition, we really just accomplish so much more, like the READ Act and everything that we do in terms of advocacy we couldn't do without our coalition members. So we're very grateful for their involvement and support, and we're so happy to have World Learning here today. So Gabriella, would you like to share a little bit about yourself? And I can unmute you if you like. So I've unmuted you.
Hi. So my name is Arielle Nadeau. I'm a senior currently in Florida. Next year I'm going to be attending Barnard College of Columbia University, and I'm planning on majoring in international relations and joining the Navy ROTC program. I do a lot of work with Girl Up, so I was a reporter for them last year, so I got to interview some of their champions, and we're working right now locally in Florida on a regional summit, which is actually this Saturday, so that's really exciting. And I might also teach a coding class to try to have some impact on education locally. It's specifically for girls, so that's a little bit about me.
That's great.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks, Gabriella. I just wanted to make a quick mention of our work with Girl Up. We have a great partnership through the Women in Science YSI camp for girls in Namibia, actually, right now. So we work closely with Girl Up, and it's a great organization, so we're glad that you're involved with them.
Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And GCE US is very, we have a great relationship with Girl Up as well, and they've been very supportive, and we have such great coalition members, and we're hoping for our advocacy summit to have a session on some of the barriers that girls face when accessing education and some of the solutions that are being developed, policy, etc. So hopefully one of our organizations, either Girl Up or Girl Rising, will be able to attend. And that's something that we're looking forward to as well. So Gabriella has done such great work. She's so involved, and we're so happy to have her here. All right. Jennifer, would you like to introduce yourself? And you can do it in the chat box as well, or you can unmute yourself.
Hi everybody, this is Jennifer Rigg, and it's really great to connect with all of you. Joel, huge thanks for helping us celebrate Global Action Week for Education this week and sharing your knowledge. Gabriella, it's such a pleasure. We're really delighted for your leadership and your involvement in global education and girls empowerment advocacy. And we've been hearing that this webinar series has been really helpful for people to be able to gather the information and learn at multiple times, knowing how busy everybody is. So please know that the discussion today will continue to reach multiple people, and just again, my thanks to all of you. Huge thanks, Arielle, for organizing this. I think she's been doing a series of Twitter chats for Global Action Week for education with youth advocates, with education partners, and we've been finding that there's just really exciting, strong support from around the globe. Across the Global Campaign for Education, there are coalitions that are active in over 100 countries. So this week in particular, and then it helps to build that momentum. And then, of course, there's more than just 1 week a year when we're advocating for global education, but we know that this week at the end of April for Global Action Week for Education helps to really build that momentum and bring everybody together. So thanks so much for making the time and for leading and being an advocate.
Thank you, Jennifer. Excellent, excellent. So thank you all for being here, truly dedicated. I guess we'll go ahead and get started, and the session will be recorded, so anyone who joins in late or can't make it today will be able to refer back to it. So let's go ahead and get started. So you already know about Global Campaign for Education US, but we are a nonprofit coalition member organization working to ensure that all children around the world have access to quality education, and we have our excellent coalition partner, World Learning, here. My name is Arielle Brown. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Youth Engagement and Communications Associate at GCUS. And Jennifer Rigg, our Executive Director, is here. And we also have our Policy and Coalition Associate, Jessie Diamond, who isn't here, but she does excellent work. She does our policy and coalition building. So she's a great resource as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Joel, to tell a bit more about World Learning.
Okay, thanks, Arielle. Well, we are celebrating this year our 85th anniversary. We have 64 offices worldwide, about 1,000 staff, and we are in Washington, D.C., as well as in southern Vermont in a nice little town called Brattleboro, is where we got our start. Probably our claim to fame is that we are responsible for training the first generation of Peace Corps volunteers from our campus before they went overseas on their missions. So that's a little tidbit about us. If I could maybe just roll right into it, because I don't want to take up too much of everybody's time. Arielle, could we do the next slide, please? Okay, great. So Gabriella and others, very quickly on the agenda today, we've just gone through the introductions, and then we're going to move to a conversation around sort of what to expect on Capitol, how it works, and give you a sense of, again, the layout, the structure, and then why does advocacy and engagement matter with Congress, and then some best practices, some of the do's and don'ts, if you will, and then give you a quick sense of what I'm doing currently, even today, and then open it up for questions if that works. So, Ariella, next slide, please. Arielle, excuse me. So, just a quick overview of Congress, and I think this is a helpful starting point for the conversation on appropriations and advocacy. There are three branches of the government: the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. Congress is the legislative branch. Congress has the House of Reps, so that's 435 members in total, and the Senate has 100 in total. There are 20 permanent or standing committees in the House and 21 in the Senate. These committees have legislative jurisdiction over particular issues. So they consider related bills, which could become laws eventually, and recommend related measures for their respective chambers, the House and Senate. So they can originate from the House and the Senate, from reps and senators. In Congress, they are usually the organizations, the individuals who are introducing legislation are linked to particular committees. So they have oversight responsibilities to monitor agencies, programs, and activities. They have influence within Congress on a particular issue. So, for example, committees include the Appropriations Committee, Foreign Affairs in the House, and Foreign Relations in the Senate, and then Armed Services. These are examples of particular committees. And so Armed Services Committee has jurisdiction, of course, over defense issues. Each committee is organized has subcommittees. For example, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has subcommittees that are a blend of regional and thematic groupings. So, for instance, the subcommittee, there's a subcommittee in Foreign Relations called the Subcommittee on Western Hemisphere and Global Women's Issues. That's not to say that other subcommittees and other subcommittees don't deal with women's issues. That's certainly not the case, but they make it a point in that specific subcommittee to have that included there. So some would argue it's sort of a rather strange pairing, but that is what it is. The Appropriations Committee has 12 subcommittees. And so as global education advocates, we work primarily with committees dealing with foreign policy. So Foreign Affairs Committee in the House and the Foreign Relations Committee in the Senate, and Appropriations Committees in both the House and the Senate. So within the Appropriations Committees, global education advocates tend to work with the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Subcommittee. That's called SFOPS for short, so the State Foreign Operations and Related Programs Subcommittee. They have jurisdiction over the State Department budget, USAID, and so forth. Other related programs being, for instance, the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Arielle, next slide, please. Okay, great. So a bit of a hodgepodge here, but we're going to dig in now and give you a sense of what is an appropriation. What does that mean exactly? Appropriations measures provide funding for the agencies and programs. It's essentially a mini budget bill that sets aside money for select federal departments, agencies, programs, initiatives. So it's what's taken together makes up the federal budget. And again, only Congress has power to pass appropriations bills. So SFOPS, the State Foreign Operations Subcommittee, provides funding for state, USAID, and related programs, as I mentioned before. So that's sort of their jurisdiction. That's basically the international affairs budget. So it's a large 96% or so chunk of the international affairs budget, as we have on the slide. Annual appropriations, I want to give you a sense of the annual appropriations cycle, because this is always important to think about in terms of how we engage in effective advocacy. Timing is critically important. So the appropriations process is initiated by the President's budget submission to Congress, or his request or proposal, which is due on the first Monday in February. This is then followed by congressional consideration of a budget resolution that in part sets spending ceilings for the upcoming fiscal year. The target date for completion of the budget resolution is April 15th. It's easier said than done, certainly. And then the committee and floor consideration of the annual appropriations bill occurs during the spring and summer and so forth, and then you sort of get through the fall and winter until there's an annual appropriations that's enacted. And so in this process, there are three appropriations measures. The one that we're particularly interested in is the regular appropriations bills. These provide most of the funding that is in appropriations measures for a fiscal year, for a given year, which must be enacted by October 1st. If that doesn't happen, Congress can pass a continuing resolution, this the second type of appropriation measure, to continue funding, usually at the same level of the previous fiscal year, if you've run into the next fiscal year without passing that appropriation bill. I hope that makes sense. And then almost in every year, there's a supplemental appropriations bill. This is usually a bit about emergency funding for a famine, countering ISIS, that type of a package that comes together as a supplemental. Now, the Constitution requires House and Senate approve the same measure in precisely the same form and language before it's presented to the President for a signature or for a veto. So usually once the House bill is passed, that appropriations measure is passed, the budget is passed, it's sent to the Senate, and the Senate passes the bill, but it replaces that entire bill with its version as an amendment, if that makes sense. So then Congress can override a presidential veto. If the president's, this administration, the president has recently said in this FY18 budget that passed that, no future budgets can look like this, which is, some would argue, a threat to actually veto the next budget bill. So Congress can override that veto if they have 2/3 majorities in both the House and the Senate. Arielle, next slide, please. Thank you. So here I just wanted to give you a quick sense of where we are with funding for fiscal year 18, which we are about 6 months into. On the top, you have the fiscal year 18 House mark, that level for the international affairs budget, which is $48.9 billion. And on the top right, you have the Senate mark of $53 billion, a little bit higher than where the House was. When all was said and done, and we had an enacted omnibus, a fiscal year 18 bill that the President signed, it was $55.9 billion. So that's certainly an improvement. It's actually about $2 billion higher than the FY17 enacted level if you take out the supplemental funding that was included. So that's pretty big, and for basic education, that's $800 million, which is a big number. For the Global Partnership for Education, GPE, it's $87.5 million. So it was a good number all around in the international affairs budget. Obviously, there are going to be ongoing challenges with what that looks like for FY19 and additional follow-on years. So, Arielle, could you move to slide 9, or if we have a question, I can stop a minute.
Remember, you can leave comments and questions in the chat box as well. But for now, we'll go to the next slide, but feel free to flag any questions.
Yeah, and just as an FYI, Arielle, I am not monitoring the chat, so if you can assist with that when we get there, that would be terrific.
Yes, absolutely. I am in the chat box.
Okay, terrific. So, how global education advocates work with Congress. I think this is getting more to the meat of the presentation, and I think that's going to be helpful to you all. Global education advocates work with Congress to build support for global education. So you're educating staff and members, and you're cultivating relationships with those staff and members. Global education advocates will share success stories from our programs or impact stories in briefings, so events on the Hill, or in meetings with members of Congress and their staff to show the return on investment, the value of the programs, and ultimately to encourage adequate funding for this work. Advocates will often draft, for instance, a Dear Colleague letter. A Dear Colleague letter is a letter that is from a champion in Congress to the chair and ranking of the particular committee, so in this case to the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee that's handling this budget. And it promotes global education funding and pulls together additional champions in support of this effort. And that's a big part of what many advocates work to do. Next slide, please. What successful advocacy entails. So I think first and foremost, when you're thinking about how to engage in effective advocacy, you have to think about showing up to these offices, engaging with empathy and understanding. So congressional staff are very, very busy people. They're constantly filtering information and prioritizing information that their member needs to know for a particular hearing that day, or a piece of legislation that they're considering and working on. So there's a lot going on there. It's sometimes 12 to 15-hour days. You could end up being their 5th or their 10th meeting in that one day. So that's something to bear in mind, I think, when you're engaging with these folks. So to break this down a little bit and into sort of more digestible parts, when you're engaging, I want to dig in on what does engagement sort of look like in these offices, and what does that look like for you all? And I think you can think of it in 4 pieces. So it's before the meeting, that pre-planning. It's the day of. It's what is going on during the meeting, and then it's after the meeting. What does that look like? So beforehand, ask yourself, what credibility do you bring to the table? Are you a constituent? Are you a young person? Have you seen firsthand some programs on basic education? You have to think about what's your source of credibility, and how can you build on that credibility as a messenger for basic education? I think the main way to quickly build credibility is to do your homework, so that you can be a more powerful voice in basic education, and it's a sign to the staff that you're taking that time with them and that opportunity very seriously. So put in the time on the front end to be prepared to have a successful meeting. I think that's critically important. Next, review and digest resources and advocacy material. So GCE has some great material that they will share with you before you have any of your own advocacy meetings, and you really want to digest that and make sure you're familiar with that. Figure out what your member of Congress, who your member of Congress is. Decide what you'd like to discuss with that office in particular. Are you just there to share success stories or let them know that you're a constituent and you care about basic education? That's great. But maybe there's more. Maybe there's a sign-on letter or an appropriations request that the wider basic education community is urging Congress to support and that you could mention in your meeting. I would say a lot of times the staff you'll meet with are looking for action items. So I think it's always helpful to be able to offer them success stories. But if there is an ask, they're certainly looking for it. So know what the clear purpose of your meeting is. Know what party your member of Congress belongs to. That's an important one. Know their background and whether or not they have been supportive of basic education programs in the past. Do they have anything big going on right now? Maybe there's something that's taking up a ton of oxygen. So for instance, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky right now, he was in the media, in the press recently as potentially not supporting Mike Pompeo to be the next Secretary of State. He ended up supporting that nomination, but it was a big issue that if you were then in Senator Rand Paul's office, it would probably have been helpful to have shown that you knew that was going on. So showing empathy, knowledge builds credibility and eventually trust. So I like to visualize the meetings and run through various scenarios and situations ahead of time. The extent to which you can do that, if that's helpful to you, I would encourage it, because then it can help you anticipate additional questions or follow-ups that are going to come up. So now moving from sort of the pre-planning, what happens before, to the immediate day of, just before you're in at that meeting. I can't stress it enough, but be on time. And it's not so much it is sometimes a respect issue, for staff, but it really is more than anything else. If you're a constituent especially, they do want to meet with you. And so if you're late, it just takes away time in their busy schedules for you both to engage one another. So give yourself enough time to get to the meetings. When you arrive at the front office, introduce yourself to the front desk folks. Those are either interns or staff assistants who are out there. Let them know who you are. Let them know why you're there and who you're meeting with, and exactly at what time. If you're there a little early or a few minutes late, hopefully you're not late, but it does happen sometimes, and hopefully we can avoid it. But if you have them, offer a business card, because that's helpful for the staff who will call back and see if your contact is ready for his or her meeting. And then, I mean, this is probably obvious, but maybe not. Dress appropriately and professionally. It's usually a sign of how serious you're taking the meeting. For me personally, I like to dress up rather than down, even during recess or the August recess, for instance, when all of the members are back in their home districts working from home. If I'm in a meeting, and even if the staff themselves are down-dressed because it's 105 degrees in Washington, I like to be in a suit and tie because it's a way for me to convey my respect, my seriousness of taking the meeting, and so forth. So, and remember that once you get rolling in these meetings, I think we all tend to get a little nervous before we walk in, but once you get rolling with these meetings, it's actually a lot of fun. It's a really good opportunity to engage people that work hard and care about either certainly where they're from, where you're from, but also what you have to say and what you care about. So in the meetings themselves, be positive. Avoid unrelated political statements or other issues. It can be tough. It can be hard sometimes to do that, but try not to undermine your number one message. You're there for basic education. Try and be there fully for basic education. The staffer may have nothing to do with the other issue that you raise, so be appreciative of the staff time throughout. Communicate that with a thank you, and clearly communicate your message. And think maybe ahead of time, just what do you want to leave that staff member, that office with? And if you have 5 seconds in a meeting, what does that look like? If you have an hour, how can you reinforce that message in an effective way? So it's possible to disagree without being disagreeable. I think that's important too. I know sometimes it's hard. We work with offices that sometimes I personally may not see eye to eye on different issues, but I'm there to focus in on my advocacy on basic education. So I try and make sure that I stick to the point and really only engage where we can find alignment. So either at the end of the meeting or on the way out the door, it's always good to offer to be a resource, to share additional stories from the community and on the benefits of basic ed, to offer to be in touch, or to, if they have a follow-up, to see if you can be helpful in any way. That gets to moving beyond sort of the credibility and moving into sort of developing a relationship that has some trust, which I think is useful. And they certainly appreciate so. And during the meeting, take notes. Did staff offer you helpful information on whether or not the member supports basic education or seemed inclined to support? Did staff have follow-up questions? I think that's all very, very important. And again, it shows that you're taking it seriously when you are jotting down some notes. So after the meeting, so you've left the meeting and you're walking out the door, or you're down on the first floor of the Hart Building or wherever it is, give yourself a chance to reflect internally on how the meeting went. So reflect with your group participants if possible. So I like having a moment of self-reflection, as well as then coming together as a group and sort of having a feedback loop where you can share perspectives on how it went, what worked, and what didn't. So how can you improve the next time in your own advocacy? And what's your next advocacy move? What's the next opportunity? Is it time to build a larger coalition with other credible voices? Maybe that's going to be your next step. So follow up with a thank you email to whoever you were in touch with on staff, the scheduler, the person who you met with specifically. You could consider even that same day dropping off a thank you card with that office directly. That can be a nice touch. And then that's the 4 components, I think, of a successful meeting that you all can sort of think about. In terms of how to schedule the meeting itself, call your member of Congress to schedule a meeting, contact the scheduler, make sure you specify whether you'd like a meeting or that you'd like a meeting in the district, so in DC. Try also to get an email, because I think doing a follow-up by phone and by email can be very effective. Don't feel like you're being a bother. The squeaky wheel gets the grease in this engagement. So staff are not going to be upset with you that you're contacting. It may very well be that they want to meet with you and that they've got inboxes that are completely out of control, getting so many emails a day. So keep contacting until you get a meeting locked in, and then confirm the meeting 2 days out so you're all set. You don't show up and find out that they're not prepared for you. So moving to the do's and don'ts. And we've covered most of this in how you execute a successful meeting and all the phases of a successful meeting. Do your homework. I think pre-planning is, for a lot of us, underrated. It's the #1 priority. If your pre-planning is solid, most of everything else will flow exactly as planned. So understand what credibility you have or could have in a meeting. Work to build trust in meetings with staff. Understand the clear message. Don't make staff have to translate it or work harder to receive that message. That's really important. Oftentimes, these staff are completely inundated. And so, frankly, they're even at a point where they're having a hard time taking in new information. So that clear message, something that's not going to be hard for them to understand, is very, very important. And then quality over quantity. Do fewer meetings better. It's much more effective if you're focused on quality in a couple meetings rather than quantity in like 7 meetings in 1 day. I think that sometimes, and I've seen, and I didn't mention this, I had worked in the Senate previously, and I've seen both, and I can tell you quality over quantity any day of the week. So what would motivate me if I were across the table as that congressional staffer, hearing from constituents who care about these issues? Learning from the meeting just how impactful a particular basic education program has been, and that, again, constituents know about it and care about it. So it's not simply that, it's great when you can score a meeting with a member of the staff who engages directly on issues related to basic education, but if it's someone else, maybe someone more junior even, that's okay. I mean, they really want to hear from you, and that message will be relayed. So I think that's important to remember. Some of the don'ts in meetings that I've seen and I'm aware of, I think that hopefully can be helpful to you all, is don't make assumptions about an office's support or opposition to basic education programs. If they haven't supported before, if you can't find evidence that they've supported basic education programming in the past, it doesn't mean they aren't definitively not supportive or in direct opposition to funding for basic education. It could be that it just hasn't simply been a huge priority, and that's something that, again, that's why we engage in advocacy, because maybe this is something that is of interest to them. So next, don't reprimand an office for either not having supported basic education in the past or for really any reason. So try not to speak poorly of other offices or members. That sometimes happens. It can be off-putting. Don't let yourself get too far off topic. That gets back to the point of making sure that you're being clear with your message. I think you should avoid politics and other issues. And again, always try and find alignment with that office. It may be a sliver, maybe just a very small sliver of alignment that you can obtain, but that's critically important. So look for the links that unite you rather than divide you. Characteristics of the worst meetings that I'm aware of. when advocates voice anger over the fact that the senator couldn't join, or if you had a meeting with so-and-so, let's say you had a meeting with the legislative director and then the legislative assistant took it or the staff assistant took it, expressing disappointment can be very off-putting to the staff in that case. When advocates, I've been in situations where advocates have come in and didn't know the name of the senator or the staff or myself, and we're meeting with them. So that's really again, sort of back to the pre-planning, knowing who you're meeting with, critically important. Again, when advocates are late, it's a missed opportunity around the table. And then when the message was not conveyed at all or not effectively, when you don't want a staff member to walk out of a meeting and say, so what was that about? What were we doing there? And then I touched on this briefly, but in terms of next steps, maybe, thinking about credibility, maybe next steps are bringing different voices into the effort. And I think, different voices mean different types of credibility, different perspectives on why they themselves care about basic education, why basic education is important. A coalition on advocacy is often most effective, especially when it's not sort of the usual suspects engaged in that advocacy. My own source of credibility is primarily based on my having worked in Congress. I think that's really helpful. It's a good foundation, certainly, to start if you want to dig in advocacy and engage more regularly in advocacy. So, I cultivate relationships by learning about the office or the person to begin with, by listening, and finding areas where, again, our views on certain issues are aligned. You want to expand that relationship and not simply be sort of continuously going to that office for assistance or with a specific ask, a request, but also work to be a resource. So for instance, at World Learning, we bring experts, some of our country representatives from our work overseas to share with different members of staff sort of what they're doing, why it matters, what we're seeing in terms of our results, impact stories that we can share. Another way to do it is to provide questions for members' offices for hearings, or send them just general updates on basic education programs so they are aware of what's going on. And again, so this gets to the issue of either you're sort of asking versus offering. And so if you can do a blend in advocacy, it's important for us as a community to do a blend of asking, which is critically important, but also offering some information, offering some guidance, offering our appreciation for all the work that they do. Arielle, next slide, please. All right, so just to give you all now a quick sense of what I'm doing, I am calling you from sunny London right now. We had just recently launched our new inclusion toolkit called the Transforming Agency Access and Power TAP Toolkit and Guide for Inclusive Development. Inclusion is central to who we are at World Learning and how we create and implement programs. So we're working with partners to promote more inclusive programming that brings traditionally marginalized groups in society into the fold. Women and girls, ethnic and religious minorities, persons with disabilities, LGBTQ, and etc. So marginalized populations is the focus, but it's bringing traditionally included and excluded together in this sense. It takes a shift in mindset, a shift in thinking to understand who has power, who doesn't, and why. And as a development organization, it's critically important that we are doing our part to drive inclusion, including in our basic education programs. So we all have a lot of work to do on inclusion, but the TAP toolkit is a good next step and sort of a catalyst for increasing inclusion where we work. So that's it from me for now, and thank you all, and I look forward to any questions.
Thank you so much, Joel. That was really just a rich, information that you gave to our advocates from an insider's perspective. So at this time, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them, or you can enter them in the chat box. And as you're asking your questions, I can also just remind you, if you are interested in becoming a youth advocacy leader, please feel free to email abrown@gce-us.org, and I'll put my email in the chat box. We're going to be having a wonderful summit in June, and we hope to have a wonderful turnout. We're going to be going to Capitol Hill to advocate for global education, and we also have webinars that will be coming up in June. So if you're interested, please feel free to email me. And does anyone have any questions? Any questions? All right. Yes, does anyone have a question?
Arielle, this is Joel, and if I may, just for a minute, I hope part of what I'm trying to convey to folks is that advocacy itself is not simply an add-on in our work in development and in basic education. It's a critical part of how we expand our community and develop and sort of increase the awareness here in the U.S. and around the world as to the significance of the work that we're doing, why we do it. And I think we always need to be making that case, and we do that through advocacy. And so, you know, you all being interested in this is critically important to the larger effort. So, you know, I really want to thank everyone for being here on the call, and you know, if you have additional thoughts or questions for me, I'm happy to be in touch, certainly. So
yes,
thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Sorry, so
yes.
Gabriella just asked, how did you start advocating for education in terms of your background? And also, Joel, you bring such a fantastic background internationally and on Capitol Hill. Do you mind sharing what thoughts you have on it as to what people can do in district that makes a difference, in addition to meetings directly with their members of Congress when they're in Washington, D.C.? You know, any insights you might have from the inside in terms of when people are contacting their members of Congress through social media, by phone, by letter, et cetera, you know, the different ways people can have an impact that might go beyond just the in-person?
That's a great question. I could talk for days on how important the district meetings are, so I'll start with that. I mean, the district meetings are so important because we focus so often on the international affairs budget of showing the local impact in our communities in the U.S. Certainly that's something that we do with our exchange work, something we do with trade and with other issues. So the extent to which, again, we can show back home in the state and district offices, and you know, it's so powerful to know for members and staff to know that there's a constituency for these issues, and again, bringing in sort of any sort of that connection of constituents and local back home is important. And I think, frankly, having worked in a state office and then in D.C., I can tell you, I think oftentimes the state staff feel that they are sometimes out of the loop, let's say, on some policy issues. So there's a hunger there in those offices locally to engage in those issues, and the best possible way is through actual constituents going face to face. So that would be my point, hugely important, and I think from DC, GCE and others can be very helpful in helping organize. And if you're interested in that, getting in touch with them and seeing if they can, with support of other members such as World Learning, piece together groups of constituents to join together in having meetings at the district and state levels is really effective. So that's that. And then, so how did I begin advocacy for education? That's a great question. I worked for Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, who was a terrific boss, and I think is doing a great job still in the Senate. I worked my way up, so I sort of maybe more like a very quintessential Senate staff story, came from the campaign and then worked my way up in the office to a point where I was helping support her on the Foreign Relations Committee and the Appropriations Committee, the State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, and I can tell you it became very clear when you begin to dig in on these issues how important and how often how underappreciated the component of education is in our foreign policy approach in the world. So that was a big piece, and also the marginalized populations. I mean, that's something that Senator Shaheen has cared greatly about for a long time, and so it was eye-opening to delve deeper into those issues and think about how do we provide sustainable programming, and how do we do, and the way to do that is for it to be inclusive, but also for us in terms of effectiveness, also realize how important education is. And that's why, for instance, now at World Learning, we have a program where we're helping to ensure that Syrian refugee children are being educated in Lebanon through a program called Katabi. So that's sort of how I began. I think I had some experience in advocacy, more sort of people-to-people advocacy from the campaign perspective, and then sitting on the other side of the table when advocacy groups and advocates would come in to brief me and to present their argument or case. And it's really nice for me now to be again on the other side of the table, and it gives me a renewed appreciation for how important, again, that constituent advocacy really is, that authentic voice. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. And where can they get more information about the work that World Learning is doing as it pertains to inclusion?
So we have some information on our website, worldlearning.org, and then we have a new TAP website, which is tapinclusion.org. So it's TAAP inclusion.org, and we have the toolkit has about 40 different trainings that we offer, but it's about, again, helping to, as a catalyst, shift mindsets to considering the issue of inclusion and exclusion and how to address that. And so it's critically important, obviously, for the development community when we want to make sure that no matter what, we're not perpetuating exclusion in our work. And as a result, we would be less effective than we need to be if we want to make a difference in the lives of so many people.
Thank you, all of our youth who attended. We are so grateful to have you, and when you go to your policymakers, you have such a strong voice. So thank you, Joel, for coming. We will continue to send out resources, and if you're interested in learning more, please get in contact with me. I hope you all have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Bye,
Arielle.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.